video about the Year 11 Section B exam technique, which is the Great Depression and New Deal topic, as well as the race relations topic. Both topics you'll have about 35 minutes for in the exam, and we'll hopefully talk about timings in the video as well. Right, first of all, the 8-mark question, which I'd recommend you spend about 15 minutes max on. We've talked about these before quite a lot, and there's a video already out there talking about these. But just to go over that, you need to explain the key features of something, and that will make more sense later when we sort of look at a model question or a practice question. And you're looking for 2, preferably 3 points. Okay? You need detail and depth, so you need to include evidence to support all your points to demonstrate your knowledge. And finally, you need to make sure your answer is linked to the question with key words. So use keywords from the question to make sure your answer is linked straight back to it. We've talked about this in lessons, but one way to make sure you have different points is to try and break your thinking into ensuring you've got different categories or different themes. For example, you can go for a short, a medium and a long-term reason or consequence or effect. You can go for a local, a national and an international. Again, reason, effect, cause, consequence, depending on what the question asks you. You could also go for social, political and economic. Social, if it's how it affects the people in their lives. Political, how it affects those in power and sort of the power systems. And then economic, how it responds and how it sort of changes or alters the economy. So the sort of things relating to the finance of a country. If you're thinking about the people, we can break up people down into different groups, can't we? So you could break them down to the working class, the middle class and the upper class. And again, a slightly different way of doing it, we could break it down to the workers, the peasants and the army perhaps. So again, different groups to ensure that we show the examiner we're aware of the different sort of impacts or reasons or causes or consequences depending on the wording of the question. Good question to think about with this is explain the main effects of the Wall Street crash on the people of the USA 1929 to 1932. What you need to do, again, 2 or 3 reasons with evidence to show you've got a deep understanding. You could break it down into the working class, the middle class and the upper class. All 3 sort of were affected by the Wall Street crash, but all 3 had very different experiences. Or you could think about the social impact, the political impact and the economic impact. Make sure though, if you're using this technique, you link it back to the people. Pause the video here and have a go at just planning this question. See what you get. Think about the effect on the working class. Well, they were those who were working in the factories, who were affected by overproduction and were sort of the first to be fired. So an effect for them would have been they'd have been made redundant and they'd have suffered as a result of that. Next, we think about the middle class. They were those who had stocks and shares but had bought them on the margin. So as soon as the shares lost value, the bank started calling their loans back in, and it was their property that was taken away. So effect for them, they were those who found themselves in Hoovervilles. About the effect on the upper class. Now, they were affected, maybe not as bad as the other 2 classes, but for some of them they had to fire any staff they had, and they also had to sort of take on greater responsibility for themselves. Others did benefit, such as JFK's father, who was able to buy the shares at a very cheap price and at a later date sell them for profit. So the 12-mark question is obviously slightly longer and demands slightly more of you. The exam board's target for this question is it wants to see an understanding and analysis of an interpretation and an explanation of key concepts. So you get given a statement, and what you've got to do is you've got to agree with it, disagree with it, comment on maybe why the interpretation came about, and then conclude and answer the question. Like we always talk about, you need to make sure you've got plenty of evidence. You need to make sure your answer is linked to the question using the key words to ensure that. When we talk about how many arguments to have for each side, a good way is to think of 2 or 3 reasons to agree, and then 2 reasons to disagree, and then an alternative idea if appropriate. For example, if the question talks about, in race relations, Martin Luther King being the most important man, you would disagree and you'd give 2 reasons why you disagree, and then you'd offer an alternative, somebody who is maybe more important. Right, then let's have a look at a 12-mark question. The New Deal led to the economic recovery of the USA in the 1930s. How far do you agree with this interpretation? Explain your answer. At this point, pause the video before I sort of talk you through how I'd answer it. Disagree, you can talk about how the New Deal didn't save America. People did stay unemployed. Maybe you could... For your second point, you could right back to the first 100 days and the Banking Act, how that created confidence, how that restored confidence, and ultimately how that made the American people start believing in banking again. Disagree, you can talk about how the New Deal didn't save America. People did stay unemployed. Maybe you could introduce a separate, like a group to talk about. You could talk about maybe how the black people of America were still seen as second-class citizens and still found themselves unemployed. For reason two, you could pick up on the word economic. Whilst there was sort of psychological recovery in America, the economy hadn't fully been saved, had it? And that sort of leads into the alternative idea, which we're going to talk about next. Finally, like I said, offer an alternative. And in this case, it wasn't the New Deal that led to the economic recovery of the USA in the 1930s, it was World War II and the trade that brought with it. Now finally, for all those guys looking for the A stars, you need to comment on the interpretation. Why has this sort of comment come about? So the New Deal led to the economic recovery of the USA in the 1930s. This is pro-Roosevelt, so maybe this was made by a Democratic historian, somebody who supported the Democrat Party and therefore supports Roosevelt and the work he did. Last but by no means least, you need to conclude. You need to answer the question, you need to make a judgment, and you need to show an examiner you're sort of able to sustain and form an argument. That's where you do it in your conclusion. You wrap up the question and you really sort of prove you understand the concept, you understand why the interpretations come about, and you fully address that question. Again, keywords are a good idea to make sure you're linking to the question.